arcs when an even stronger Luffy plus Law fighting together still have an extreme difficulty fight against Doflamingo, and it's debatable that they might have lost without outside help. Hey, what's up everybody? It's LeeLos, and today we're talking about who's stronger between Zoro and Katakuri. Stay steady in the pursuit of your dreams and goals. You're born to win, you're made for greatness, and I definitely believe in you guys. Keep up the great work each and every day. So let's start out with power scaling Fishman Island Zoro. So since during Fishman Island, Zoro doesn't even come close to trying, Luffy's full power at Fishman Island gives us a good idea about Zoro's full power at Fishman Island. Luffy goes into his training with Rayleigh relative in power to a pacifista, and he returns from his training 2.5 years later, slightly below the average power level of a 3rd Division commander, which is proven in later arcs when an even stronger Luffy plus Law fighting together still have an extreme difficulty fight against Doflamingo, and it's debatable that they might have lost without outside help. Doflamingo being a powerful character who narratively represents the weakest level of power right before being an average 3rd Division commander, which is emphasized by the fact that from this point on in the series, all of Luffy's big boss battles are either with 3rd Division commanders or higher ranking pirates. Zoro scales below Luffy ever since Enies Lobby, which is confirmed when a wrecked, just completely trashed, beaten up Lucci, fresh off that giant pistol carousel, was like, I could still rumble your whole crew and really mess them up big time. Luffy believes him, then proceeds to defeat this same villain by himself that his entire crew would have lost to without him. Then the gap between Luffy and Zoro just continues to grow even bigger. Luffy then goes off and battles an island full of hockey users, enters into the most dangerous prison in the One Piece world, runs hands with every living being that enters his line of sight, ranging from straight up demons to top tier commander level fighters that Luffy has absolutely no business squaring up with at all right now. Then he enters a war where the average power level is so high that Luffy's legit more relative to the fodder characters than he is to just the average fighters. And then he brawls countless people many times stronger than himself, survives and is revived from numerous life-shortening levels of pain and stress, and then all that while Zoro's just taking a nap on an island at Mihawk's crib. He doesn't even wake up until after the war's already done, basically. So now this Luffy, who's considerably further ahead than Zoro, then starts training in an even harder training environment than Zoro is, with 500 enemies stronger than he was, and a master that has far more wisdom and experience with hockey, comes out of this 2.5 years later, the boss of the island, and is absolutely just stacked out. All of that, and he was still a lower level than 3rd Division commanders on average. Zoro, who went into the time skip weaker, then received only a relative gain in power to what Luffy received during the time skip, would then logically still be weaker than Luffy after the time skip. Even if you said Zoro got the same power up from the time skip training that Luffy did, he would still be weaker than Luffy after the time skip because he was weaker when the training started. All that being said, even with Ashura, Zoro scales below 3rd Division commander level during Fishman Island. It's more likely that Ashura would be stronger than Gear 3 but weaker than Gear 4, which is still nowhere near enough for Zoro to put down Katakuri, because we see Katakuri actually take numerous of these exact punches from a much stronger Luffy, and Katakuri was so strong that he went numerous years without his 3rd Division and 2nd Division commander siblings ever even being able to land a single attack on him. So I mean, he would literally beat 3rd Division commanders without taking damage, and he did it for years. So yeah, like Fishman Island Zoro and Punk Hazard Zoro get absolutely low diffed by Katakuri. But let's head over to the LeeLos Adventure Talk Show to go more in depth and see how Zoro does in the following post-time skip arcs. Today is episode 3 of LeeLos Adventure Talk Show. Today we're talking about Zoro versus Katakuri, all arcs from post-time skip to the current arc in the manga, Egghead Island. So shout out to Lenny but this was Lenny Duran's idea to do it for all the post-time skip. You know how there's freestyle rapping where people are just rapping off the dome? This is freestyle weaving where I'm power scaling off the dome. Dressrosa Zoro is just like the tiniest smidgen stronger than Fishman Island Zoro. The only strength gain he would have gotten was the almost unnoticeable gains he makes from continuous training that he does as just part of his character off screen. While other people are relaxing on the Straw Hat ship, he's either sleeping or training. That's like his thing, so he will get a little stronger from that. Something that's stated in the pre-time skip is that the Straw Hats get stronger from every island they go to, from just surviving the waves and surviving the enemies they face. They get stronger each island. So just the process of them going from Fishman Island to Punk Hazard to Dressrosa, Zoro has actually gotten stronger just from like the traveling aspect of it. That was something that was stated by Zoro. Just surviving the seas makes them stronger, and Oda hasn't written anything to make that not true so far. And there's actually some pretty good points you can use to say that that applies to all of the pirates that have a relative potential. For example, Kid and Law have been able to make it to the top of their generation, and they haven't had a master this whole time. So them going from sea to sea, gaining hockey blooms as well, or have been their main methods for getting stronger that we know of. It's also shown through characters like the ones who hockey blooms don't really apply to them, characters like Nami. She doesn't really have very many intense fights, yet still, by the time they reach Enia's lobby, Nami's capable of pulling off feats that Arlong wouldn't be capable of. Like her whole battle with the CP9 agent, Arlong could never dream of doing that, and Nami just like a few months prior couldn't do anything to fight Arlong, and then here she is months later thrashing someone stronger than Arlong and taking hits from her. And you ask, like, how's that possible? She's not even a hockey based fighter. How could hockey blooms help her? It's like, well, yeah, they really wouldn't in this case, so the only other option would be her traveling from sea to sea made her stronger, right? So there's strength gains that they get from going from island to island, sometimes, but it's different depending on which character it is. Zoro at Dressrosa is roughly the same power that he was in Fishman Island. Not exactly the same, just a little bit stronger. So I'll just put it to you real simple. No. No, Zoro in Dressrosa is not beating Katakuri. No. And the way you can scale it is like this. Before Zoro got Enma, the entire community, the entire One Piece fan base was uncertain as to whether or not Zoro could even beat Doflamingo. Doflamingo, who, he's a very powerful character, but it's debatable that there's even a single 3rd Division commander in the series that Doflamingo is capable of beating. I don't, like, you could really make a hard argument that he would lose to every single 3rd Division commander that's been shown in the series as of right now, except for the exception of Blackbeard's crew, but you can go even deeper. Zoro, his strongest attack that we see him do in Dressrosa was the Sanzen Sakai, like post-time skip upgraded version. And when he does that against Pico, it blasts Pico in half, and then he proceeds to just low diff one-shot Pico. Now, what you need to keep in mind is pre-time skip before Ashura, that attack Zoro did to finish off Pika was his strongest attack. So he did his strongest attack prior to Ashura itself at that time, and Ashura is stated to be his strongest technique at this while he's on the rooftop of Wano. So that's a long way of saying Zoro busted out his 2nd strongest technique to defeat Pika. Not saying he needed it, and he proves he doesn't really need it because right afterwards he chops Pika into smaller pieces with unnamed attacks, but I just want to put that out there. Like, Pika wasn't even Dofi's 2nd in command. Virgo was. So that was against the 3rd in command. Zoro fought the 3rd in command for the first time and used his 2nd strongest attack to defeat him. That's something I wanted to say. And then Ashura, the multiplier for it post time skip hasn't been... It hasn't been stated to us up front exactly what it is, but you can use context clues and feats to get an understanding of around a ballpark of how strong Ashura would have been during Dressrosa. So let's put it like this. Pre-time skip Zoro, this is the weakest you can make Ashura by using the same metrics we use pre-time skip. So in pre-time skip, Zoro's Ashura was introduced at the same time Diable Jambe was, and it was also the same time as Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd, but it was narratively written in a way where Gear 2nd, Diable Jambe, and Ashura were all considered relative transformations, and then it was Gear 3rd that put Luffy a tier above Zoro and Sanji. So really, Ashura was written post-time skip to be a relative multiplier to Gear 2nd and Diable Jambe. Now, we saw Gear 2nd Luffy against Doflamingo, and Doflamingo was taking those punches to the tummy saying, bro, I can barely feel this, like, this is some light work. So, I mean, and the other thing about Ashura is not a full-fledged transformation the same way Gear 2nd is. In the recent episodes of the anime, they made Ashura look like a transformation. They stretched it out and let him have like a little clashing session with Kaido. But in the manga, Ashura to this day has never once been written to do that. It's always been shown to just be a one technique, like a one move thing. And the moment the technique's gone, Zoro morphs back into like his normal normal human being self. And Ashura was stated to be a representation of Zoro's raw fighting spirit or intimidation. I don't remember the exact wording on it. Ashura hasn't been confirmed to be a transformation. It's more just like a one-shot attack. If you're lowballing Ashura to the absolute lowest, you could put Ashura at like the same level as Luffy's Jet Gatling in Gear 2nd when he was in Dressrosa, and that did nothing to Doflamingo, as we saw. That's the lowest you could put Ashura. At the highest you could put Ashura at, it would be about relative to Kong Gun. And now this is super highballing Zoro here, but you really can't put it anything above Kong Gun. And like, that's a disgusting highball. During that time, before we even knew Gear 4 existed, it was a common debate in the community to say who's stronger between Zoro and Luffy, but the overwhelming majority of the community was on Team Luffy, saying, yo, Luffy, even though we didn't know what Gear 4 was, we were convinced that just Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd alone was all Luffy needed to pack up Zoro. It would be an extreme diff fight, but we were all leaning more towards Luffy. And then we found out he had Gear 4 on top of that, a whole other level. So, I mean, just from the community standpoint, it used to be a normal thing to say that there's no way Zoro could beat Gear 4 Luffy in Dressrosa, but now it's become more something that you have to debate because in Wano, Zoro was extremely impressive. But a lot of people don't seem to understand like the narrative elements of it, that Wano for Zoro was the same thing Whole Cake Island was for Luffy. Luffy, when he went into Whole Cake Island, he struggled his butt off to beat Doflamingo, and then he was about at the 3rd Division Commander level. That's where his training from Rayleigh took him to, was about relative to 3rd Division Commanders, which was a huge jump because he went from being weaker than a pacifista to relative to 3rd Division Commanders, and he can actually outbox them 1v1 for a little while. That's what Dressrosa was for. It showed like the limits of where Luffy was right now. Whole Cake was the journey of Luffy going from 3rd Division Commander level to being relative to the 1st Division Commanders, and arguably not even at 1st Division Commander level fully yet. Still around like Queen level. Like if end of Whole Cake Island Luffy fought Queen, that would have been an extreme diff fight for Luffy, right? And Luffy beat Katakuri. I mean, I've made a whole video on that in the past, but it was long and short of it, Luffy had greater durability than Katakuri, and his attack potency was higher than Katakuri only in Bounce Man version of Gear 4. Luffy went into Whole Cake 3rd Division Commander level, and then he went from 3rd Division Commander level to 1st Division Commander level, and he did it through numerous fights. Like, that whole arc was kind of a massive training arc for Luffy, where he battled Cracker for 11 hours straight, a 3rd Division Commander for 11 hours straight, then immediately afterwards fought Sanji and just let himself get thrashed by Sanji. Then right after that fought an entire army. After fighting that army, which was really just a spree of numerous battles, he then proceeded to fight Perospero a little bit, and then he fought Katakuri in another 11-hour brawl, where the whole time he was just learning and developing his haki and all this crazy stuff. His Gear 3rd was starting to match the power of Katakuri's Perilous Mochi by the end of the fight. So Luffy's haki blooms were off the chart throughout Whole Cake Island, And that was the journey from 3rd Division to First Commander for him in terms of power. Zoro, after Dressrosa, was still not even at Doflamingo's level. A lot of people forget how strong Doflamingo was. Doflamingo, it took Luffy and Law fighting him together at the same time in order to beat Doflamingo. And the truth is, Luffy and Law together still lost. It took Luffy and Law and help from a ton of Coliseum fighters and civilians to intervene in between Doflamingo and Luffy for Luffy to pull the W. And Dofi was honestly trading hands with Luffy. He's still able to hold his own somewhat using his that's a BS lie. Once Luffy pulled out Gear 4, even Awakening, Dofi was getting throttled. But Doflamingo was a monster. He was crushing a whole country while simultaneously fighting Law and Luffy, and he still won. Luffy had to recharge, take a 10-minute break while Doflamingo fought the entire time, got his haki back, and then he won. And the only reason Luffy was able to take that break was because of the civilians. Well, actually, hold up, because I just remembered this. Oda said this in an SBS, that Luffy would have been able to beat Doflamingo on his own anyway. He implied it. He said that Gear 4, what it does, it drains Luffy's haki, but he can still run while his haki recharges. The reason he let that guy carry him, Guts, I think his name was, the reason he let Guts carry him was just because Guts offered. And if Guts wasn't there, Luffy would have just had to fend on his own, figure it out on his own somehow. Oda has a line saying that in an SBS. So you can use that to debate that, okay, maybe Luffy could have beaten Doflamingo on his own, but that's also a hard argument to make because you're saying like, okay, Luffy with no haki could defend himself and run away from an enraged Doflamingo using his awakening, turning everything around him into strings. Yeah, honestly, it did kind of seem like Luffy needed that help for real. Let's be honest, man. So, I mean, that is a debatable thing there. But any freaking way, Doflamingo was so strong, he was able to beat Luffy and Law together. And at that point in the series, Zoro, it wasn't even confirmed if Zoro could beat Law yet. And honestly, you could make a better argument that Law was stronger than Zoro was stronger than Law, seeing how much damage Law was able to produce to Doflamingo. And Zoro doesn't have any feats damaging any characters at that level yet in the series at all. That all being said, Zoro was objectively below Law and Luffy together, meaning he was objectively below Doflamingo as well. And yeah, like I said, even if you highball Zoro to the max, putting him all the way up to Kong Gun, which is already a stretch because you're saying that Ashura, which was shown pre-time skip to only be a Gear 2 level amp, you're saying that now it's a Gear 4 level amp somehow. And that's a stretch there on its own. But if you want to put it all the way up there, you could put it up there by saying, okay, well, Zoro, he got his base form so strong that his base form is as strong as Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd. It's a big stretch still. Anyways, if you stretch Zoro to like the absolute highest possible level in Dressrosa and you say his strongest attack, Ashura, would be strong enough to match Kong Gun, Dofi's still getting up and thrashing him right after that because Luffy hit Doflamingo with Kong Gun, a Leo Bazooka, a Rhino Schneider, a Culverine, all this crazy stuff. And Dofi just kept on trucking. And he did this while his organs were straight up mashed potatoes from Law's Gamma Knife attack. So yeah, Dofi was a monster, and he was on a level that Zoro just, I mean, even if you highball Zoro, he's still below what Doflamingo was at that point in the series. Also, we saw Doflamingo low diff Sanji, and Zoro was stronger than Sanji at this point in the series. That's the narrative people go with a lot of the times because Zoro had a much more powerful master during the time skip, and I'm more on that side too. But we saw Doflamingo just low diff Sanji, so it shouldn't be that hard to imagine that he would do a similar thing to Zoro as well. Zoro would also get thrashed by Doflamingo at that point in the series. That was a long and short way of me saying that. Yeah, okay. So anyway, like, yeah, it's pretty likely that Doflamingo would have thrashed Zoro in a very similar way, especially since we saw Zoro never cut the birdcage, implying that Doflamingo's haki was stronger than Zoro's haki and he couldn't cut through it. But I mean, that's a debatable thing too, because you can also very easily say, no, you know, Zoro chose not to cut the birdcage because he has faith in Luffy. All of those are possibilities, but using common sense, using scaling from pre-time skip, and then just saying what's most likely true, and then also seeing how Doflamingo just fodderized Sanji, and how we're not even sure if Zoro could beat Law. Law did way better against Doflamingo than Sanji did, so Law's on a higher tier than Sanji. We're not sure if Zoro can beat Law, and Law got throttled by Doflamingo. So long and short of it, that should pretty succinctly say, no, Zoro's not even touching Doflamingo and Dressrosa, and Doflamingo is arguably weaker than every other 3rd Division commander in the series, so Dressrosa Zoro doesn't stand a dang chance against Katakuri, who would low diff Doflamingo. Katakuri would low diff Doflamingo. Now, on to the next one. The next arc after Dressrosa is Zo. So during Zo, there's no power-ups of any kind. There's no fighting. Zoro literally just is chilling that whole arc. He clashes with Carrot once, but that's not enough to do anything. That didn't push Zoro. Like, he didn't get hurt. He didn't fight, right? Like, he threw one attack. You can't call that a fight, bro. I'm sorry. Like, if you want to say that gave him a hockey bloom, like, I don't know what to say, man. I don't know. I don't think it did, personally. Because at that point, it's like Zoro tying his shoes or putting a shirt on in the morning would give him a hockey bloom at that rate, basically. Zo, he's the same power level as he was at the end of Dressrosa. Then we see in Whole Cake, Luffy goes on that massive training saga, and he goes from 3rd Division level to 1st Division level. Zoro's still the same dude. The only difference is like he's traveled to a different area and has been doing his off-screen training that we always assume that he's always doing. So more or less, he's about the same level when he gets into Wano. And in Wano, we get to start seeing the real limits of Zoro's power. So in Wano, there's 2 different things that give us a that show us where his limits are. One is his fight with Killer, and his other is his fight with Denjiro. So in his fight with Killer, Zoro uses 2 swords, and he's about dead even with Killer while using 2 swords, and Zoro's handicapped because there's another guy just taking like cheap shots at him whenever Zoro's guard's down. So really what that would show is like 2 sword Zoro was stronger than that weakened Killer, because Killer didn't have his main weapons either. So it was weakened Zoro versus weakened Killer and a little bit of handicap help on Killer's side. And it was a pretty even fight. Then Killer actually starts winning, gets Zoro with a massive death blow. Not death blow, sorry. A massive like chomp out of his shoulder, right? What's important to keep in mind here is like when he does that attack, Killer loses a weapon and Zoro gains a weapon. So Killer went from having 2 scythes to fight with, which was already not his ideal weapon, to now just 1 scythe. And Zoro went from 2 swords, which wasn't ideal to him, to 2 swords and then a 3rd blade. It's not a sword, but he can use it in a similar way. So Zoro got a power up while Killer gets a power down, and then Zoro one-shots Killer. So I'm saying all that to say that like the gap between Zoro and Killer is not that big at that point in the series. And then we also see Zoro fight Denjiro, who is relative to the 3rd Division commanders, and Zoro's fighting him with just 2 swords. It's either 1 or 2 swords at that point, and Zoro's feeling pushed by him like, dang, this guy is strong. So I'm putting those in there as measures, so like people who want to say that Zoro is like on the same level as Luffy can start understanding like that's not what Oda thinks. So I just want to put that out there. Like Zoro has been his limits have been shown a good number of times, and I just wanted to point them out. So it's like that's more feeding into the idea of, okay, Zoro's around 3rd Division commander level. Otherwise, he would be washing these characters who are also 3rd Division commander level. So start of Wano, Zoro's still before Enma. Zoro's still getting clapped and thrashed up by Katakuri, but after getting Enma does for Zoro what all of Whole Cake Island did for Luffy. When Zoro gets Enma and he gets back up from that hockey bloom of fighting Killer, he now becomes so powerful that he's able to cut Kaido and do damage to Kaido without using Rio. And to prove that he doesn't have Rio, this might get retconned in the future series, but right now the evidence that Zoro does not know Rio is that he couldn't hurt King while King had his flame mode on. A lot of us, myself included, thought that Enma just gave Zoro Rio, but that doesn't seem to be the case, because if it gave Zoro Rio, then he would be still hurting King while King had his flame mode on. Oda might retcon it in the future and might say, oh, the flame mode, they're invulnerable even to Rio. I hope they don't do that stuff, but let's continue with the point I was making. Oh yeah, Zoro was just 3rd Division commander level until he got Enma. Then he got Enma, and Enma shot him all the way up to a point where he can now damage Kaido, which was something that Gear 4 Kong Oregon Luffy after fighting Katakuri couldn't do. Okay, like that Luffy couldn't hurt Kaido, but then this Zoro comes in and is slashing him and doing damage to him, and then he has Ashura on top of that, which does so much damage to Kaido that it scars him. This is the Zoro that is clapping Katakuri up like it's no big deal. Because, well, this is the only... It's funny because their fights, it's never really close. It's just post-time skip. It's either Katakuri slapping him. The moment Zoro gets his meaty claws on Enma, Katakuri just gets packed up and washed, because that's just such a massive power increase. And it goes beyond anything Katakuri was shown capable of taking. Katakuri in his whole arsenal doesn't have enough power in his entire arsenal to kill Zoro, and I'll prove that in a second. And then on top of that, he doesn't have the durability to take any serious attack from Zoro either. So let me explain both of those. So the one, he has nothing in his arsenal that could even kill Zoro. Zoro, this man blocked a combined attack from Kaido and Big Mom, and not just any normal attack. It was the Ikoku Sovereignty. Anyways, it was an OP attack. And to put it on the scale, to just show you like how that's so disgustingly above anything Katakuri can possibly do. Katakuri fought Luffy for 11 hours straight, was wailing on Luffy for the majority of those 11 hours, and Luffy still stood up and won that fight. He still couldn't KO, he could not KO Luffy after 11 hours of thrashing this dude. Okay? And then Luffy gets a Hockey Bloom, gets even stronger than that, and fights Katakuri full strength and gets one shot by oh, my bad. I meant to say Kaido. Then this Luffy gets stronger, it's Hockey Blooms, durability, all this, he gets improved in in every way. A much stronger Luffy in every way. He goes and fights Kaido, gets one shot. So Kaido in one attack did something that Katakuri could not do in 11 hours. Then the same Kaido is now taking the fight more seriously, so much so that he's willing to combine attacks with another Yonko, shoots this combined Ikoku Sovereignty, and Zoro straight up blocks that stuff. And I want to get into the controversy part of it. In the manga, it's more shown that Zoro blocks it for 1 second and Law Room teleports him out of the way. In the anime though, bro, they make it look like Zoro straight takes the entire thing, okay? And this is another thing I want to get into, is that anime Zoro is actually a lot stronger than manga Zoro, because in the anime, Luffy hits Kaido with King Kong gun and it does no damage to Kaido whatsoever. Then in the anime later on the rooftop, Zoro does Dragon Twister and is able to cut Kaido. So that would put Zoro's Dragon Twister above King Kong gun from start of Wano. It's crazy, it's crazy. Anyways, all that being said, Zoro was able to take an attack multiple times stronger than what Katakuri was able to produce in 11 hours of full-on punching. Luffy was basically a punching bag that absorbed nothing but strong right hooks for 11 hours straight. And then Kaido comes in, just one shot does more damage than all the accumulated right hooks of 11 hours. That's how big the difference is, and Zoro's capable of taking attacks even more powerful than the one that one-shot Luffy at the start of Wano. So yeah, Zoro could legit probably just stand there and have Katakuri hit him with his strongest moves, Zoro, and hit him for 11 hours straight, just lighting him up with his strongest stuff. And Zoro's so tanky that if he just stood there blocking, he'd be good. After 11 hours, he'd be good. Like, based off of what we've seen in the show. It's crazy. So yeah, Katakuri has nothing in his arsenal that could even, like, kill Zoro. And then Zoro, his normal attacks are stronger than anything needed to take out Katakuri. Katakuri, in his whole fight with Luffy on screen, we only saw him take about 4 bounce man attacks. And some of them he was blocking it anyway. Then he took a handful of attacks from Snake Man, but Snake Man and attack potency scales below Gear 3rd. It's debatable that it's like Gear 3rd level attack potency, but just really fast. And that's shown by how, like, in Gear 3rd, Luffy's able to clash with Perilous Mochi without like feeling pain from it, like expressing the pain of, oh man, I just punched a big meaty fist and it did more damage to me than it did to him. He doesn't do that like comedic thing after his punches in Gear 3rd near the end of the fight because of the Hockey Blooms he's gaining. But he still does it in Snake Man like right afterwards. So that's a good way of saying, like, Gear 3rd might have had higher attack potency than Snake Man did. And Luffy's strongest attack in Snake Man put Katakuri to sleep. Bounce Man is a lot stronger than Snake Man in terms of attack potency. Bounce Man was able to overpower every single thing Katakuri had in his arsenal. The only reason he was getting tagged while he was in Bounce Man was because Katakuri had superior observation haki. But while and Luffy even says himself, like, bro, with Gear 4th, I'm not going to lose to like any of your attacks. I'm big boy hecka meaty in this form. But when he's in Snake Man, he's clashing with Katakuri. He's still in pain. So that shows that Snake Man's below Bounce Man, and then it's also shown to be below Gear 3rd, arguably. That's more debatable, but there's that too. But just a few hands in Gear 4, Snake Man was all it took to put Katakuri to sleep. Not to mention what King Kong Gun would have done to this man. Would have turned him into mashed potatoes. The same King Kong Gun in the anime just bounces off Kaido's chest, doesn't do a dang thing. And then Zoro, just like about 50 episodes later, does a Dragon Twister and he's bleeding. And then he pulls out just a one-handed attack with Enma, and it had so much power in it, Kaido dodges it. All this being said, Zoro's attack power is way higher than anything Katakuri could even dream of. His durability is way higher than anything Katakuri could even dream of. The only question becomes, can Zoro hit him while Katakuri is using Future Sight? The answer is probably no, because Luffy wasn't able to do it during Whole Cake. But this Zoro is much faster than that Luffy was, and he was capable of reacting to a combined attack from 2 Yonko. So I mean, it's possible that he might just overwhelm the observation haki with pure speed, which has been shown to be, you can do that in One Piece. Luffy did that when he was fighting the Boa sisters. They had observation haki, but Luffy didn't, and he just went so fast that they couldn't react to it. So it's possible that Zoro might be able to do that same thing to Katakuri, seeing how he was able to react to a combined attack from 2 Yonko. And we also saw that 1 Yonko was capable of speed blitzing Luffy. So yeah, all that being said, the moment it gets to Wano, it's just a disgusting one-sided slaughter. Well, not the second it gets to Wano. It's the second Zoro gets his meaty claws on Enma, it becomes a one-sided slaughter. And then after fighting, then something else a lot of people don't know is Zoro actually gets another power-up in Wano, and it's while he's fighting King. Enma just starts draining his haki to the same level that he was draining Odin's. And Zoro, instead of resisting that, he goes with it and then just uses that to develop new techniques. And also that's Oda's way of saying that Zoro still has not surpassed Odin, by the way. So he got a power up from that too, and then he got a Haki Bloom as well from that like insane near-death brawl, because he had battled Big Mom, Kaido, and King. He probably got the biggest Haki Bloom of his dang life after that fight. So now it's just an even worse slaughter. Like, there's nothing Katakuri can do against Zoro after Wano. And the other thing to keep in mind though is if they reintroduce Katakuri into the story again in later arcs, they might do a narrative thing like what they're doing with Luffy versus Lucci right now in the manga. They scaled Lucci up a good amount so he could like tango with Luffy a little bit, but there's still a monstrous gap between the two. Depending on what Oda has planned for Katakuri, he might do the same thing with Katakuri. That's what I think he's gonna do, is like Katakuri will come back and maybe have some witty banter with Luffy, but we all know, like, if Luffy got really serious, he could just one-tap him in base form. So, I mean, but anyways, yeah, Zoro all through post-time skip, just to summarize it all up real smoothly, Zoro gets thrashed all the way until he gets his paws on Enma, then Katakuri gets thrashed. So yeah, that's Zoro versus Katakuri. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like the video, comment. Let me know what you thought about this talk show. Let me know what you guys would like me to talk about next. Write down your questions and put them in the comments here, and I can compile those. And if I like the questions, then you'll probably see them in one of the future talk shows. So yeah, once again, thank you guys for watching. And subscribe for more adventures.